Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. I hope you're well. So, let's start with the beginning. So, who am I? My name is Karen Lloyd. I am the managing director and founder of Armstrong Lloyd, and we specialise in marketing, tech, recruitment. So, what an interesting 6 months, if not 12 months. Just reflect back to this time 12 months ago when you were all writing your 2020 plan. Now, did anybody get that plan right? Because if you did, I want you to put your hand up and I want you to tell me immediately because I want to know what the lottery numbers are for next week. Because literally, it was a crystal ball time, wasn't it? We've had a roller coaster of a time. And, as someone who said to me yesterday, actually, a very interesting comment is I think the biggest fear factor is we couldn't control what was happening. We couldn't control the market. We couldn't see what was happening. And in fact, we can't really control the next 12 months, but there are factors we can control, and this is the most important things I want to talk about today, which is the people that have done well and what we can learn from those companies. So let's take a look at what some of the attributes were on the people that have fared well and have done well. And so there's one thing that you can control in your company. You can control your leadership. You can control your strategy and you can control your response. And it's the companies that have really focused on their response that have succeeded. Now, I have defined three different responses, and obviously, those three responses for three different companies, it's not, they're not pure, but they're blurred lines between the two, but the definition of the three. So, let me start. So, there were the first set of companies who are the business as usual, bury your head in the sand responders. So when COVID hit, they basically their response to their company was, okay, we've got to work from home, but I'm still expecting everything from you that you have delivered in the past. We're just gonna carry on doing what we're doing. We're not going to change anything we're doing, and we're just going to grip on and we're going to keep trying, and I'm sure we'll be okay. So those candidates that worked for those companies were probably the first people to be on the phone to us within probably 6, 8 weeks, where they were beginning to be feeling quite fearful for the company. Some of them may have been put on furlough, some of them may not have been put on furlough, but the company, in some instances, people were put on furlough and still expected to work, and they were treated quite badly. And those companies are the ones who, probably did lose people by either their own fruition or they actually ended up having to make redundancies because they lost their customers because they were not adapting and they were not changing in terms of what they were doing. So the second set of companies were what I call the panickers. So their first response was to cut the whole of their headcount, not the whole, but a big portion. Some American companies particularly did this, cutting big chunks of sales teams, and also cutting marketing people. I mean, I had one person who said, the CEO has, decided to let me go. I'm, a demand gen person, but they've got 9 months leads from me, so they don't need me in the business. They're going to cut my cost, and I'm out. And that happened to lots of people who did that very very quickly and very much responded, and they were just looking very much at cutting costs. And those people also had the stance that they weren't going for new business. They're just going for what was in their pipe at the moment. There was no point trying for new business unless they were already talking to those companies. And there was one company that we're aware of that actually shut down, all of their sales and marketing function totally, and retreated back and said, right, we're just going to fulfill what we're currently doing with our customers, and we're just going to hope to retain our customers, and we're not going for new because no one's going to buy our product. So for me, the lesson learned for those was that there was also a really big response to attitude and your belief in your product and your belief in your market, and that was a key factor in the leadership. So the final response was what I call the thought leaders. the thoughtful leaders who were the companies that were leading their companies and developing them very much forward. So they were the companies that said, right, we're up for a rough ride. There's going to be some change. Let's first of all just take a breath. They communicated immediately with everybody in their company and they said, right, we've got you. We're going to be okay. We're going to get through this together. Let's take a breath. Let's not panic. Let's not do anything. We are going to have to change and we're going to have to think about this, but we're going to figure it out and we're going to figure it out together. Then they started talking to their customers very, very quickly. They didn't bury their head. They talked to their customers and they talked to the potential customers. And they had really good conversations, not trying to sell them anything else, but they said, how can we support you? What's your problems? What can we do? How can we work in partnership with you? And what can we do to get through this period? Those companies saw their growth slow but not drop. They also, these were the companies that you probably also saw some people sharing on Facebook and LinkedIn. They might have been sending care packs to their staff. They would have been having, group meetings on Zoom. They would have had HR people or other teams that were giving response to people about mental health, and they were ensuring that people weren't lonely and, feeling very isolated. And they were also being flexible. I think the fundamental factor for the loyalty and the retention of teams and people and leading things is the flexibility. Children now working from home. How many of us had kids who we were homeschooling and were at home as well? So companies were looking at, what is your output? What's your performance? How can you fit what you need to fit into the day that may be different to the way we worked before? Maybe you start later, maybe you work later. And there was a lot of flexibility, and those companies fared well. And those companies were the ones had the least likelihood of their members of staff phoning us up and saying, I want to get out of this company, I hate it here. And believe me, we had a lot of people doing that. We have had lots of people who were not made redundant through this time, who've said, I haven't been happy with the way my company has responded, and I'm going to stay now because I need a job. But I am keeping my eye out, and I will be looking to leave them because I've lost my faith in leadership. So, out of those three, to summarise, those three groups of people, the business as usual teams, the panickers, and the thoughtful leaders. Obviously, as I said, no one fell perfectly into any of those categories. But, someone who veered much towards the thoughtful leadership teams were the ones that did fare well, not just with their customers, but also with their staff. And those are the ones that are continuing to grow and develop their team and company right now. And I also, also spoke to someone who is a very senior leader in a SaaS software company that do digital transformation, and their product was an essential product for the infrastructure of their business. And he said, interestingly, their conversion rate increased. So they had less people in their funnel, less people but wasting time on demos and doing things. But the ones that were in there, their conversion rate was phenomenal. And any other time, they would have been, very excited by the conversion rate because people were not tire kicking. If someone needed or wanted something, they were serious in this marketplace. So there was a bit of a silver lining for some. So let's move on to other factors. So your leadership was, and the company's leadership was, for me, the most important. But a secondary factor was also geography. So companies that focused on the UK only, or they also struggled a little bit. compared to companies that also had an outreach and where they had maybe a European base where they had 4 or 5 countries. So, any time during COVID, if one of the countries was faring worse than the others, they still had sales coming in in one of the others. So they were kind of ring fencing their business, particularly companies with German companies that were selling to German markets seemed to be doing fairly well, and also our companies with head offices in America. And I was talking to one of my colleagues about this, and they said it's really funny because we didn't think the American companies would be doing well because we look at the media and we hear, that the American rates, and obviously we see everything that's going on with Donald Trump, and we're thinking, are the American companies, surviving or doing well? But generally, they are leaders. They have, a strong foothold in tech and SaaS solutions, and they're big giants, some of those companies with a strong footprint and a strong base. So those companies did take a breath, and actually they were pretty good, most of them, at being the thoughtful leaders in some cases. And they have retained and they are continuing to grow and have a strong base. And I spoke to somebody in a very, very big, well-known brand, and he said to me that the company have their company, American owned business, well, a household name that you would all know. He said that their company had been absolutely phenomenal and they hadn't lost anybody at all. No one was even furloughed, and the company did what they could with loans and support and anything else. So, there were some really good examples of live case studies of those companies. So, moving on from geography onto obviously the type and sector of the companies that they were that the technology providers were targeting, and a lot did depend on what your customers were. So if your customers were in anything that involved having to turn up, like an event or travel or hospitality, or even if you were selling to markets that were selling leisure, gym, golf clubs, anything that your target audience was finally in that grouping, those companies did start to struggle. But where companies succeeded and they started to do well is the word that I think we have heard a lot, and it's been used many, many times, is the word pivoting. People did start to pivot. And they did start to look at alternative revenue streams, alternative industries, alternative markets. And that was a really key factor to some of the companies that also looked and how they responded to their customers and where they were going and what they were doing. Then it was terms the structure of the team. So if your go-to-market and your structure of your team meant that you were generally spending a lot of time going to events, and a lot of your route to market was supporting your sales team at big global events and exhibitions, well, obviously they died. And there was rumours it was all going to come back in October. There's rumours it's going to come back next April, but I think companies have almost that they've made a decision that they're not going to rely on events, and that's not happening. And some of them have been very creative, actually, changing. We've had companies that have been doing 2-3 day festivals that have been 24/7 online, that have involved whiskey tasting, yoga, as well as thought leaders. So people have been creative and changed that. But obviously the skill set of the people working in events has taken a real knock. And in some cases, they've moved those people and upskilled them into other teams, but in some instances they haven't, and they've restructured. And I spoke to, probably about 3 weeks ago now, somebody who was part of a global company, and their UK team used to have 7 or 8 people within it, and a big portion of that their market was going to events and exhibitions, and they literally reduced their team from 7 to 2 during the crisis. It was very difficult, and I said, is that a reflection on, you've just reduced your team to nearly like a third of where you are? And they said, no, we're taking a pause, but we will be restructuring and regrowing our team. And we're probably going to be hiring 3 or 4 people, which is going to be budgeted right now in this October. And we're going to be looking to start in January, because next year we are expecting to grow. And we've reduced, we've held and pulled our belts in, but basically we are looking to grow next year, and we do need that different skill set and that different base that we didn't have in our team, but we will have for next year. So we hear the lots of doom and gloom, that people are shedding and cutting and culling, but in many cases, they're cleaning up their skill base, and they're looking at what they had and what they need, and they're looking at that gap, and that's where we're seeing some of the cutting. um, Obviously, some of the other people that were cutting were the ones that had that leadership response I talked about earlier, but the thoughtful leaders are the ones that are looking at where they're changing their team and their dynamics, and where their skill set and what is needed. So, what skills are in demand? What are people hiring for, and what are people wanting to have in the next 12 months, or even 3 to 6 months? So, one of the big skill sets that we are finding very high in demand is product. And again, it's that magical word of pivoting. I know some companies who were potentially in really important sector, that was really needed and required during the crisis, such as healthcare, and those companies haven't had to pivot. In fact, I've spoken to someone and they said actually they really didn't want us to pivot. They needed to know we were doing what we've always done, and we were being consistent in what we did, and they don't want us to pivot. But in many instances, companies did need to change, and they did need to pivot in what they were looking for. And this I found fell into 2 categories. There were companies that had what they considered essential products. So the essential product that a company needed, and they were never going to let go of that product, because it was part of the backbone of the company. It was part of their digital transformation. It was part of what they were doing. So if you were selling a SaaS product in that area, then it was really, really key, and people did not want to lose that area at all. But it was the nice to haves, the ones that classified them as a nice to have product, that were struggling. So lots of companies are looking at their product offering and their product positioning, and they've gone from almost zero or very, very small product team to hiring product heads of products and maybe 4 or 5 people in their team, and that's been a newly created teams that has happened, and that we've seen as a response in the last 3 or 4 months. One particular sector that that I think was just really interesting, to look at their response, and I was having a discussion with someone else the other day, and we both said it kind of stunned us, was cybersecurity. Because cybersecurity, which in many ways, with everybody working from home, you'd have thought they would have been very essential and very important, and actually they would have had quite a lot more pipeline and business. But quite a lot of companies were paying for cybersecurity, and they hadn't really embedded it into their business. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and they said there was one company, they were spending £3 million a year on cybersecurity, but they hadn't really embedded it. The company who'd sold it to them hadn't really done the customer success. And they looked at it and said, oh, there we go, let's get rid of that cost. That's £3 million straight away we've just saved. So if you didn't have a value proposition, and you didn't embed your product in with a customer success, and you believed that your product was a nice to have, and your sales team believed your product was a nice to have, and your marketing team believed your product was a nice to have, and that was reflected in your proposition, those companies are categorically the ones struggling now. And quite a lot of those companies have candidates talking to us because they don't want to work in a sector that they perceive to be nice to have. So it's really important, I think, going back to what I said at the beginning about leadership, is that you try to position your proposition and work with those product teams as a nice to have, as a nice to have, not as a nice to have, sorry, as an essential product. And you need to make sure that you're really looking at the value and what you can offer your customer at this point. And there's never been a time when this is more important. So just to summarize, what I said there is that product is a really key skill in technology that is in very high demand at the moment, especially within specific niches and people that have got experience within that sector. The other area that people are recruiting and looking at is analytics. It's always been a hard to fill one. It's always been a niche. People, they're either they love analytics or they don't. It's in the last 10 years, it's a skill that in marketing is probably a new skill. It may have sat in finance or other sectors in the past, but the analytics and data providers and being ahead of the trends and knowing what their customers are doing and what their customers are wanting are becoming paramount. And companies are hiring very much in analytics and growing in that area. And then the third area that we're finding people are hiring in is also digital content. So another pivot. And I was really surprised when someone said to me, "Oh, Karen, we're pivoting in digital." And I was like, "Really? You've done digital for years. How can you be pivoting in digital? You've had a digital strategy. What's different right now?" And they said, "No, we were events heavy, and although we were digital for our events, but now we're looking at more influencers, we're looking at our content, and we're actually changing the way we execute our digital strategy and our backbone." And a lot of companies are looking to bring in AI, and they're looking to bring in other tools, and they've done quite a lot of work on their CRM, and their cleaning and their tidying up in that area that goes aligned with what I said so bringing together really the product, the digital and the data, and streamlining those three together. Okay. I realise that we've only got 5 minutes left, and so it is really time for me to start to move on to some questions. I hope I've given some value and use to you in terms of what we've talked about in terms of the market and what we've touched on, and to summarise, the factors of where we're going at the moment. And where the market is. And although we don't have a crystal ball and we can't see what's happening, what we can do is we can be really strong with our leadership, and we can look at our response, and we can start to plan for growth for 2021. But we do need to be agile, and we do need to have the ability to change and adapt very, very quickly at any time. And I think actually, a couple of people have said to me, in their next 12-month plan, they're going to build much more agility into it than they ever had before, and they're not necessarily looking at a pure 12-month plan, but they're looking at really breaking down those quarters and really having a real check-in and a strategy change in that time. So questions. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? I've got an offline question that somebody sent me that I'm going to ask now, which somebody asked me: are companies being more flexible with remote workers going forward, with their future vision of hiring? And the answer is yes. So, we've got a couple of companies who in the past, they always wanted people to work very locally to them, and they would only, although they would offer remote working, they still wanted people in the office 2 or 3 days a week, and they weren't willing to offer any type of remote working, for the full time. So if someone couldn't get into the office 2 to 3 days a week and weren't willing to do that, then it was a no-goer. But there are companies now who are hiring across Europe. In fact, they're hiring in Budapest, or they're hiring in Nice or Madrid or other areas where they have a strong pool of people who may be a slightly lower budget and be able to work. There is a balance, because I think there is an optimism that people will want to get back in the office. So there is still a split and a divide in companies. So I'm not saying every company is looking to hire anybody anywhere at any place, but there are companies that are being much more open-minded with their geographical perception. So any other questions, please do put into the comments box. Okay, Sean, thank you very much. An interesting question. So, which marketing skill sets do you think will be in greater demand in 2021 and post COVID? Yeah, I did touch on that, and I think that um, coming forward, it's going to be people that are ability to skill sets in terms of what they can do, but also in terms of their attitude, in terms of people that are agile, they're willing to change, they're willing to work with sales teams much more closer than they ever have. Account-based marketing now is very much coming into the fold, and really people that have got a deep understanding of vertical marketing more than ever. People are having to be much more specific about their offering and their skill set. So people that can focus on account-based marketing and integrate that across their sales teams that are working remotely is something that I think will happen. Hazel, thank you very much for your question. A good question. Is there one thing that you can recommend we do for our team right now, and what would that be? That's a brilliant question, actually, Hazel. I think that a lot of people have been having daily check-ins with their team. They've been having Zoom calls and they've been having check-ins, and they feel like they're talking to them. And we can all be guilty of this because, what we're doing today, what's our plan, da da da, off we go, and then everybody goes away and focuses. But I don't know how many people have got a scheduled sit down with their team and have said, okay, I know it's probably a strange time to ask, but where do you see your career going, and where do you see yourself fitting in? And actually giving your team a vision of where their future could be. Because a lot of people are just kind of like on to the next, on to the next, on to the next, and going round in a bit of a rabbit wheel. And I know hopefully people are already doing this because they're budgeting right now for 2021. But I'm hoping that people are sitting and listening to their team and listening to their career aspirations, because there are a lot of people that have taken time in this period, and a lot of people who are saying to me, look, I do love the company I'm working for right now, but I'm not sure where I fit in with the company. No one's really communicating this with me, and I'm not really sure what I'm doing, or where I'm going, or where I fit with the plan. So perhaps I need to be looking outside. So if any opportunities come up, please do bear me in mind. And those probably are people in your team that you do value, and they're the ones that you really want to keep. So make sure you're having those conversations. That's a really, really good point. I've got a few more questions coming in, and a few more questions that I have got from the offline ones, which I'm happy to come back and answer another time. But I did promise I was going to stick to my 30 minutes, so I'm going to do that. But it's been great having you all on board. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you coming and joining me and asking some questions. If there are any questions that you've got that you want to ask me, that are private questions, feel free to email me at karen@armstronglloyd.co.uk, or send me a message via the messenger on Facebook, and feel free to get in touch. I'm very happy to help. I'm very happy to have a conversation, and very happy to come back. But I've got more questions coming in, and I really will come back on another Facebook Live and address those questions and answer it. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and like to see you again. Thank you so much. Bye bye.